Forget frequently asked questions.
Common sense, common knowledge, or Google.
How about advice from a real genius? 95% of people in any profession are good enough to be qualified and licensed. 5%
go above and beyond.
They become very good at what they do, but only
0.1%
are real geniuses. Richard Jacobs has made it his life's mission to find them for you. He hunts down and interviews geniuses in every field: sleep science, cancer, stem cells, ketogenic diets, and more. Here come the geniuses. This is the Finding Genius Podcast
with Richard Jacobs.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Finding Genius Podcast, part of the Finding Genius Foundation. I have Nadia Doe. She's the founder of Sacred Heart Medicine. The website is sacredheartmedicine.us, and we're going to talk about her work, plant-based medicine and shamanism. So, Nadia, thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
So I understand a little bit, plant-based medicine, but I don't know what shamanism is. And, so what is it that you do? And then I want to ask you about your background and how you got into what you do.
So what it is that I do is I help people heal trauma using psilocybin mushrooms and other plant medicine. Okay. Shamanism is a type of, I guess you could call it spiritual type background that's very earth-based.
Okay, yeah, and I know I've actually spoken to some people at Johns Hopkins that are doing clinical trials with psilocybin, and, they've gone through it with ketamine, they're doing it with ecstasy, MDMA, and a few other substances, so it's showing tremendous promise, but so I guess you're focusing more on psilocybin. What kind of scenarios do people come to you? What kind of traumas do they have? And then what's the process of helping them?
Yeah, so I get people of all varieties. I happen to specialize in childhood trauma and childhood sexual trauma. So I get a lot of that, but I also get combat veterans. I get people who were indoctrinated into cults or certain kinds of religions. Just people who have trouble moving forward with their life or who haven't been able to be helped in other areas, like with traditional mental health counseling and so those sorts of things.
Okay. When someone comes to you, what's your process? What do you do with them and how does it work?
So when someone comes to me, we have a consultation. We go over their background, where they are currently in their life, what types of things they've tried. And then we roll into sometimes doing one-on-one counseling, and sometimes we go right into plant medicine work. And so primarily I do one-on-one work with psilocybin in a ceremony setting, which would be different than the clinical setting that's being studied at Johns Hopkins and MAPS and those organizations currently.
Okay. Oh, well, obviously you're familiar with all of them. Yeah. Excellent. So, yeah, their setting is, what's it like if you went to Johns Hopkins and did it? And then what's it like if someone did it with you?
So I haven't been to Johns Hopkins, but I have read some of their research. I've seen the pictures and all that. And my understanding is that it's very clinical. You have eye shades on and headphones and you take a prescribed dosage and you work with a clinical therapist or a doctor of sorts. And with me, it's very much laid back. It's rather uncontrolled. You don't wear headphones. We have music playing in the room, but you're not isolated from me, which I think is really important in that process.
Okay. Do you think that what Johns Hopkins is doing is a boon and a help to people like you into this, to this healing medicine? Or do you think it's just neutral, or do you think it's going to hurt your ability to do what you do?
No, I think it's just different. It's a different type of people that are attracted to going the clinical route. And then you have the type of people who are attracted to going the spiritual route, and they want to work with a shaman and they want to experience the spiritual aspect of it and learn about plant medicine. So it's just different.
So someone comes to you, and then again, what's your process from there? You'll do, kind of an intake. You'll ask them where they're at. Is there any therapy that happens before you do the session, or it's like, all right, let's get you scheduled and, off you go? Or do you need to know a lot about the person before you'll ever do a session with them?
No, there is no therapy that takes place beforehand. I am not a licensed therapist. Actually, my educational background is in massage therapy and the legal field. And okay. I kind of came into this work not really by choice, but by, I don't know what you would call it, it's my path. It's my spiritual path. So when I speak to them and we go over their background, in most cases, we go ahead and schedule a ceremony at that point because we both have a really good idea of if it's a good fit or not. A lot of times they're also seeing some form of counselor. I actually have a lot of therapists who refer people to me. And so they have that structure in place for afterwards.
Oh, okay. Because even if you don't do the therapy yourself, do you say, all right, before we could work together, I need you to go see a therapist for like 1 or 2 sessions or something?
I do not. I don't really think it's my place to tell people that they should do that. But okay. I mean, it certainly doesn't hurt anybody.
Yeah, okay. Got it. Will people have one session with you? Will they have multiple? Like, how do you know what to do with them? Like, what's your heuristic for making the decision on what to do?
So this is where the shamanism part comes in. My work is very intuitive, and I kind of play everything by feeling. So for the most part, people only sit with me once. They find that the experience is so profound and so deep that they end up catapulted into their life. And there's maybe only been 2 or 3 out of the hundreds that I've worked with who've come back for a second round.
Oh, what is that stat again? So you work with hundreds of people, and how many have come back for a second session?
Just a handful, under 5.
Wow. Okay. What do people tell you after their session? I mean, after the session is done, do you discuss with them what happened, or is it all personal and private? Like, what happens during the session? I mean, just give me like, if I wanted to come see you, what would I expect to experience if you were willing to have me?
Yeah, of course. So what that would look like is we would reserve an entire day. We would get together in the morning. We would work with a couple other plants that are non-psychoactive, such as tobacco. And then we would work with the mushrooms. Then I actually roll into doing some somatic body work. So I'm a certified craniosacral therapist. And I like to get people on the table while they're going into the experience to really take down their nervous system to a very parasympathetic state. So they feel very relaxed, very supported, and it tends to make the entire experience very enjoyable and very embracing.
Really? So you do craniosacral work while they're starting to feel the effects of the mushrooms?
I do, yes.
Wow. I know about it a little bit, that I guess you can get the cerebral spinal fluid to flow better through, all the vertebrae and where it's supposed to flow through. So I bet it has a very, very big effect on people in their experience when you do that.
I mean, it's profound even when they don't take anything. So if you could imagine that your mind is in a more open and expanded state, it really takes you to a place of relaxation that we often can't find without deep meditation and practice.
Does it heighten the effect of a given dose, or does it just, like, how does it change the experience for people?
Just in the way that it makes them feel more safe and more relaxed. And when you're working with psychedelics, the most important thing is that the person is feeling safe.
Have you tried doing it before they take the dose, or is it early enough if you do it, as it's starting, that it's still like what would it do if you did it first and you got them all massaged and relaxed and everything flowing, and then they took a dose of the mushrooms?
I haven't done that before, but I'm sure it would have a similar effect.
Yeah, it may have more of an effect. I don't know. I mean, I could see how it would be beneficial. It would prepare your body to receive, the medicine in the best way it could, I guess is how I'd put it, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, well, maybe you'll try that sometime. You'll do it beforehand and see what happens. Up to you.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, okay, you'll do that work as they're starting to, experience the mushrooms, and then just observe them, or what happens then?
It depends on the person. Some people really just need their space and they go deep within themselves, and it's my job to just hold the container, to make them feel like they're not alone, to make them feel safe, to keep the space energetically clear, that sort of thing. And some people, they need to talk. Some people need to be heard. Others need to be held. It just depends on what the person needs.
Interesting. I don't know. Are people, do they remember what they asked you to do? And are they like, if someone wanted to be held or like started crying or whatever it was, do they tend to get embarrassed when they're done, or do they remember?
So you remember everything. The point of working with psilocybin mushrooms, in my experience, has been to be completely present in your body. And so it's not this total out-of-body experience. Therefore, when you come out of it, you actually do remember everything that happened. Honestly, most people aren't embarrassed. They have so much gratitude that they don't know what to do with, just for being in that space and being held and being able to feel safe doing so.
That's cool. Do you stay with them the whole time they're going through it?
I do, yes.
You don't get bored and like have to watch movies on Netflix or anything? Or
I'm actually in the space with them. So one of the things about having the shamanic calling is that I actually access that psychedelic space without taking anything. And so when they're going through their journey, I'm feeling everything they're feeling. I'm seeing a lot of the things that they're seeing. And in doing so, they feel like they're not in it by themselves.
How could you do that, though? How do you know what they're, I mean, unless they tell you, like, how do you know what they're experiencing?
Before we continue, I've been personally funding the Finding Genius podcast for 4.5 years now, which has led to 2,700 plus interviews of clinicians, researchers, scientists, CEOs, and other amazing people who are working to advance science and improve our lives and our world. Even though this podcast gets 100,000 plus downloads a month, we need your help to reach hundreds of thousands more worldwide. Please visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click on Support Us. We have 3 levels of membership from $10 to $49 a month, including perks such as the ability to see ahead in our interview calendar and ask questions of upcoming guests, transcripts of podcasts you're interested in, the ability to request specific topics or guests, and more. Visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click Support Us today. Now back to the show.
Like I said, that's part of the shaman thing. It's having the ability of sight in that different space, that different dimension, whatever you want to call it.
Do you have any insights before they go into it, or when they go into it? Are you taking mushrooms at the same time, or no? You're just able to access what they're feeling?
Typically, I'm not taking anything, though I do ask the mushrooms. Occasionally, they'll say yes. So I should preface that with the plants speak to me. So I always ask permission. And if they want me to partake, I do. And if they don't, I don't. But I do get quite a bit of insight about a person before we even work together. A lot of times they start dreaming about me before we start, like in the weeks that lead up to it. And we have kind of like a psychic connection that is really indescribable.
Well, so when you speak to someone, do you feel like you're empathic, where you get a sense of their personality? And I mean, everyone does to some extent, but do you feel like you do to a large extent? Are you able to read people and get a good feel for them before you let them go through this experience? I mean, like, what's that like for you?
I'd say yes, I do that. I don't love the word empathic because that implies that you feel everything, and I really think that that's a sign of poor boundaries. I have the ability to see big picture. So when somebody tells me the story about their life or where they're stuck or where they're struggling, I can see the larger picture of cycles, of points of trauma, of belief systems. And kind of with that big picture, you're able to really go in and pull out the things, the key moments or the key belief systems that need to be changed.
I'm asking because I just don't know. I'm not assuming that you know everything or, what kind of insights you get. But like, have people told you, wow, you're really just, you're really good at just figuring out what people are feeling, or you're just very, I don't know, tuned into how people think and feel? Or I guess we'll go to the history a little bit. So how did you even know that this kind of thing would be a calling for you? And, what's your background on it?
So I came into this, actually, I was an addict. And I was a terrible wife and a terrible mother. I was really unhappy. I was working in a job that I hated, and I was just kind of like at the end of my rope. I tried every medication under the sun for this treatment-resistant depression, and I was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, which is one of those like incurable personality disorders. So I actually came to plant medicine as a last resort, and I sat in an ayahuasca ceremony with 80 other people with no shaman. And going into that experience, my mind sort of broke open, and I lifted up the weight of the entire room, and I was shown that that was my job. That was what I was supposed to do in this life, was to hold space for other people. And it was pretty traumatic, I'll be honest. And then I had to quit my job, and I had to kind of rearrange my life to start going down this path.
But why was it? Were you shocked? Like, oh my God, am I really supposed to do this? Or like, why was it traumatic for you?
It was just a lot. So that was my first experience with any kind of plant medicine or psychedelic. I was addicted to Adderall and alcohol and synthetic substances. And so stepping into this world, having that be your first experience, where it feels like you're having a psychotic break, and then you have to question reality, basically, that was really hard.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure. So you kind of got the message that this is what you're supposed to do. And then how did you figure out what to do? How did you figure out that there was such a thing as shamanism, and how did you go on the path?
Well, actually, that's kind of magical. Once this started, I had teachers who just showed up in my life. So I worked with a mentor down in Netherlands, Colorado. I had a Shipibo maestro show up in Orlando, where I lived at the time. And the Shipibo people are the original keepers of ayahuasca. So they're an indigenous tribe down in Peru. And this guy just showed up in my hometown, and I had the opportunity to train under him for 6 months periodically. And then another teacher, when I moved out on the West Coast, appeared in my life, somebody who specialized in demonology. And it kind of all fell into place, and people started seeking me out. And so it just became clear, when somebody randomly says, hey, do you want to trip sit for me? I kind of feel like that's a sign. That's how it started anyway.
Okay. And then, all right, so you trained, and I guess you did a lot of these sessions yourself. Like, it wasn't just the one ayahuasca one, but you did it many times, right?
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
I did. So after the ayahuasca experience, I actually started working with psilocybin because it was more gentle. It was easier on my body. And through that process of working with myself, I actually uncovered that I had a ton of childhood trauma that was completely repressed, including some pretty severe sexual trauma. And in working through that, I was shown how to heal it. And that's why it's my specialty, because I help other people do the same.
Okay. I don't know. What are some of the stories of people that you've worked with, without details that they don't want to share, but I mean, what kind of stories or experiences really impacted you and, made you feel like you're doing the right thing, or just, I don't know, like how have you been impacted by people's experiences, and what are some noteworthy ones?
There was one gentleman that I worked with who had a similar sexual trauma to myself, except that he had gone a step further and become a predator. And being able to hold space or to help somebody heal who is the same person as your perpetrator, if you've been victimized by, let's say, an abusive father, to sit with another abusive father and not be judgmental and not be triggered, and to just be able to love him, that was profound for me. And then help him uncover his own childhood stuff and release it, and no longer feel attracted to children after we worked together, which is huge. I had another client who was in a cult. And so the layers of indoctrination and the not having his own identity and hating women and all those things, he came out of that cult not knowing who he was, not knowing how to live life fully, how to be a good father. And he came to plant medicine, and I've watched him just blossom into this beautiful human who now helps people, who's discovering his own feminine side. Who's just finding out who he really is underneath all of the brainwashing.
Okay.
Those are some of my favorites, but honestly, they're all wonderful.
Yeah. What types of conditions or problems seem to be work best with the mushrooms, and which ones are just, I don't know, resilient, and it's hard to get, people have to do, let's say, multiple sessions, or I guess you said they don't really have to. I don't know, is there anything that, any conditions you run into or problems where the mushrooms just didn't work?
So I'd say when people come to me that aren't actually ready to face themselves or to face whatever it is they're running from, they don't get as much out of it. But that doesn't happen very often. Some addictions are also on the resilient side. Again, it depends on where they are in their cycle. Sometimes we just need to go through the same cycle several times before we learn whatever lesson we're trying to learn through it, and then we break it, Other than that, I haven't really encountered anything that hasn't been helped at least find relief.
Okay. So that's excellent. Do people relapse and have to come back to you after a period of time?
I wouldn't say relapse. I've never had anybody move backwards after working with me, at least not that I'm aware of. I do stay in touch with a lot of the people, or they periodically give me updates. I would say a lot of times they might reach a new layer, like they might reach a new level of awareness or a new belief system that was under the one that was obvious or something like that. And they get stuck again, and then they come back to plant medicine in some way, shape, or form to move forward.
Okay. But so no one really slides back, but I mean, again, you said only a small percentage need like a second session. Those people that do, I mean, what do you notice about that second session with them?
So the people who typically come back for the second session are actually people who have really complex PTSD. So like the one I was speaking of with the indoctrination, the cult, that's very complex. It's very manipulative. You have emotional, mental, physical things all going on. And so there's just a lot more layers than, let's say, one incident that was traumatic.
Okay. Well, in terms of some of the issues people have, so like you had treatment-resistant depression. I'm sure that's very, very common. For those kind of people, like what do they experience before the session and after? Before the session, I guess. Will you do the session if they are depressed at that moment, or do they have to be in like an okay state? I've noticed that, and I don't know all these people that have it, but I know some personally that do. They seem to cycle. They'll be okay for a while, and then they'll go through a day or a couple days where they're really unhappy, and then they'll come back, and then they'll cycle down again. Sometimes the cycles are days, weeks, months apart. But, when someone comes to you for the session, I guess they're excited in a better state, or some people like really down. Are there circumstances where you won't do the session and you're like, we have to wait, the time's not right?
Yes. Somebody cannot be in a state of crisis. If they're really scrambling, or they're really suicidal, or they're having panic attacks every day, that sort of thing, that's what our Western medicine is really good for, is getting people out of the crisis. That's not something that I specialize in, nor is it something I'm trained in. So again, it doesn't happen very often. Occasionally I'll get somebody who calls me who's in a crisis, but in general, I will work with them, just not with the plant medicine.
Okay, so they need to be at least somewhat stable before you can work with them and help them.
Yes, at least in the ceremony setting.
Okay, that makes sense. So yeah, I kind of rushed you out of it, but so in the beginning of the ceremony, you said you'll do some cranial sacral work. I guess you'll have music on, and then you'll ask the mushrooms if they're going to give you any insight. I don't know if I'm putting it the right way, but you'll either hear a yes or a no, and then while the person's experiencing, the mushrooms and they're peaking and going through it, do you talk to them, or do you sit there kind of in a receptive mode and see what comes to you? Like what happens during a session?
Well, I typically don't talk to them unless they speak to me first. Unless I'm given like a really strong message to say something, or to maybe it's light sage, or it's open a window. For the most part, it's pretty hands off. My job is to be there, to witness, and to hold the space for them to go within themselves.
Okay, it sounds like massage. I've heard that, like massage therapists will say, they don't talk to the person unless the person talks to them. You can probably tell I just talked the whole time. If I went session with you, you'd probably be like, shut up after a while.
That's one of the cool things about having an experienced facilitator too, is that if you're trying to talk, but you're only trying to talk to avoid looking inside yourself, we can call you on it and be like, okay, it's time to close your eyes. It's time to go in.
Okay, that makes sense. So some people, like you could see, they have strategies to try to avoid, letting go and getting into it.
Yes, yeah, that does happen from time to time.
Oh, okay, I see. Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, some people, I guess probably myself included, it's scary to be out of control. 20 years ago, I had an experience with this stuff, and it can feel like you're on the edge of reality, and it could be a bit scary,
Absolutely.
Or terrifying.
I really think that at the core, everybody is afraid of losing control.
Yeah, no, that's true. I remember thinking at one point, tomorrow I'm going to wake up. It's going to be sunny. I'm going to be hungry. I had to think like really basic type stuff, because at one point, I was like freaking out, but then it was, things improved from there. But I remember at one point I was like, oh no, it's like you're on a roller coaster, and, you just got to go for the ride. You can't get off when you want to,
That's correct.
Right. So what, I don't know, what refinements are there, like, do you feel like you got the process down pat, or what, are you in like consistent improvement mode? Like, how do you feel about your practice, and where do you want it to go from here?
I do feel like I have it down pat. However, I try not to control that. I'm always open to where we could have improvement, to how things could be a little smoother, or feedback that a client gives me on tweaking something. But in terms of moving forward, actually, I do a lot of one-on-one work helping people, but I also train other facilitators to work with psilocybin in the shamanic way over the clinical setting. So okay. I do see that really blowing up in the future, training other people.
Oh, okay. So have you started to train other people?
I have, yes.
Okay. What's that been like? Like, I guess in this scale of ability, do you feel like you're really high up the scale, or is there anyone that you've worked with, whether they trained you or you trained them, that just like you were like, wow, this person is just unbelievable, and why, if so?
I don't really feel like there's a scale. I feel like everybody's just different, and we all bring different things to the table. I have worked with some people. There is specifically one woman that I just finished training, and now she's facilitating. She is just top notch. It comes naturally to her, and she used to be a caseworker, like a social worker. So she has all the mental health background as well, which is pretty cool.
Okay, but there hasn't been anyone that just like changed your perception of what you do, or just like surprised you, and they're operating on some other level that like you hope to aspire to, or you're amazed by?
Well, I've had a couple teachers along the way, and each one of them had something that they could do that just blew my mind. And that shaped the way that I do my work.
Okay. Well, any notable experiences? Like, someone you met that was really good at a particular aspect of this?
Actually, so there was one Armenian shaman that I worked with, and, I was trained through massage, and I guess just through life, that we try to figure out what the problem is, and then we try to fix it, right? We look at the symptoms or whatever, and then we try to correct them. And so I was doing my work very much in that mode of, let's figure out what's wrong, and let's learn how to correct it. And she was like, what if you just entered every ceremony as if the person was already perfect, and you just held that thought or that space for them to just be their perfect selves? And that kind of blew my mind a little bit. Instead of trying to figure out what was wrong, trying to restore what's already there, which is a very holistic way,
Does it change the person's experience depending on the state you're in? Like, not everyone every day is great. So are there some days where you're kind of like, oh, or you're not at your best? And if so, will you not do the session? Or are there, and the opposite side of it, are there days where you feel amazing, and because of that, the person has a better session than other people would have?
I would have to say that I learned really early on that I have to manage my schedule in a very specific way so that I am at my best at all times. I take days off between ceremonies. I take weeks off after I've had like 6 weeks of clients. Like this week, I'm going down to Florida for a week to take a break, because I did learn that when I'm tired, I'm not able to hold the space as well.
Okay. Well, I just didn't know, again, if there's some days where you feel amazing, or maybe you've gotten some new training and now you're doing the session a little bit differently. But, you said earlier you feel like you've got it. You got the formula down. Yeah,
no, I definitely do. It took some practice, though.
How many, ballpark, how many sessions have you done, do you think?
One-on-one sessions, I would say in the vicinity of 200 to 250.
Wow.
I do a little bit of group work, but that's less frequently.
Anyone request that, like, their wife or husband or friend or whoever is in the session with them, not, let's say, not taking anything, but sitting there as an observer? Or do you ever have people say, like, I'm really afraid, can I have my partner be there with me just in case, like, I don't know, my head explodes or something?
I have had people request it. I do not allow that, because we all have attachment things, right, with our family and our friends, and a lot of times our spouses. And when we have that crutch, we don't rely on ourselves. We're not able to see and find our own power because we're too busy putting it into the other person.
Okay. Has there been anything that came up in a session where you were like, whoa, I didn't expect this to...
To be honest, I did have a session once when I found out the person that I was sitting with had actually killed somebody else. And
I was just about to ask you that, yeah.
That was a lot, because I totally didn't expect it. It was actually somebody that I knew pretty well.
You knew the person that killed, or you knew the person that was killed?
I knew the person that did it.
Okay.
And so that was really shocking. But I was really impressed with myself for not judging him or being triggered by that information, and just like being compassionate. But it was a surprise, to say the least.
Huh. How did that affect you? Did you had to confront that, this knowledge and everything. So did that help you? Like, when you do these sessions, do you feel like, selfishly you get a little bit of help too, even though you're helping the person primarily? But does it, what do these sessions do for you? You've done hundreds of them. How has doing the sessions changed you? Do you feel more fulfilled, or do you feel like you have, you're able to relate to people better? Like, what has it done for you?
I feel fulfilled in ways that I did not know were possible. Being able to help people really find themselves and live their full life is profound. But I've also reached new depths of compassion for all types of people, and a greater understanding of how this world works and how trauma works. And, we don't have a very good definition of trauma. It turns out that everybody has childhood trauma. It just looks different than we thought it did.
Well, really, like how so? With some kinds of trauma that, I don't know, people don't even know about or they wouldn't think is a big deal?
Well, so to begin with, a lot of people don't even remember their trauma. And because it's locked away so deeply in their subconscious, and it's locked away so that they can survive their childhood, right? Because as children, we don't know how to process severe emotions or intense emotions. And a lot of times we store it for later. And so many people have that locked in their body. And I learned this when I went to massage therapy school, that it's locked in our body, and then releasing it will sometimes flood us with memories that we didn't know we had. So we have that aspect of it. But also, we think of trauma as being seriously abused in some way, physically, emotionally, verbally. But when you have, let's say, a very narcissistic mother, someone who's really controlling, and she doesn't let you out of the house until you're 18, and she controls what you eat, and she controls what you watch on TV, like those things really mess you up. And they create all sorts of self-defeating beliefs about you, and those belief systems are running your life behind the scenes. Now, it's a whole different form of trauma.
Okay. Yeah, it's like a long-term effect over years and decades type of trauma that shapes your whole life.
It's very complex, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it makes sense. So do you feel like in your normal interactions with people, you're going to the grocery store or, you're friends with somebody or whatever, how has it changed your relationships, like with acquaintances and then with friends and then with, family and stuff like that?
So with friends, a lot of friends dropped off kind of naturally when I started down this path, because I became pretty real. There was no more like facade. There was no more persona. And once that drops away, people see who you really are, and they either like you or they don't. And so my friendships really definitely changed forms, but now I have best friends instead of just a whole bunch of acquaintances, which is nice. My relationship with my family has changed a lot because now I have a different appreciation for my parents. And, finding out that some of my sexual trauma from childhood was actually with extended family members, it's strained the relationship a bit, but all for the better, in my opinion.
What happens when you run into someone that's a jerk or they're, just, I don't know, you just don't like? If you run into someone you don't like, what do you do now instead of, like, what did you used to do before? What do you do now?
I used to work in the legal field, so I feel like that happened a lot. And it was just like, it was part of the lifestyle, right? And now I just don't. And when I encounter somebody who's unhappy, I feel compassion for them, right? Because there's a reason that they're a jerk. It's because something isn't going right for them, and they're taking it out on other people.
Yeah, I learned that recently. I forget it all the time, but I just forget. But, like a few people I know that were mean and got nice all of a sudden is because something in their life they figured out. Like one guy I know, he was gay and he finally came out to his parents and everyone, and now he has a boyfriend and he's happier with himself as himself. And he's nicer now. Before he was a freaking jerk and I didn't want to talk to him. But now he's much better. And I realized, okay, probably a lot of the reason people are mean and nasty is because they're unhappy with themselves. And again, they're just lashing out at everyone and everything.
Always, yes.
So the mushrooms that you use, have you done sessions with ayahuasca or other substances? Or do you feel like the mushrooms are like the number one tool, or is there any need to use other substances?
So previously, I did actually work with ayahuasca, and I worked with that exclusively for a bit, but it was so hard on most people's bodies. There are so many contraindications, and the typical Westerner just isn't in the type of health you need to be in to drink ayahuasca, like to be real. It's very well suited for people down in the jungle. They don't have all the processed food and the constant stimulation and the prescription medication. And so when I switched over to psilocybin, I just noticed that everyone had a better experience, that it was smoother. You didn't have to go on this extreme diet for 2 weeks before and after. And so, yeah, I work with that exclusively, but I work with other plants that are non-psychoactive, like, regular herbalist type stuff.
Oh, so do you need to prepare people physically in order to do the mushrooms? I mean, it sounds like a lot more with ayahuasca, but with mushrooms, like, what do people need to prepare for the session with you?
Most of the preparation is actually emotional, just allowing space for their emotions to come up, for things to come to the surface before we even sit together. A lot of people are very intertwined with their addictions. So whether that's like video games or the news or cannabis, I ask that all of that gets put down for about a week beforehand and that they eat intuitively. So try not to eat emotionally, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, late night if you're, if you're not feeling good and there's ice cream and you eat it, for instance, right? Or what are other emotional eating cues you've seen?
So people who eat emotionally, they eat because it feels good versus eating because you're hungry, which is eating for your body. And even just directing someone's attention and say, hey, for the week beforehand, can you try to pay attention to when you eat and why you eat and make sure that it's actually out of hunger, that changes the way that they eat, or at least, sheds light on something that they're doing.
Oh, have you had people that they go through the week and they're like, hey, you know what? I feel so much better. Maybe I don't need to come.
Nope.
Oh, too bad. All right.
I actually started having to charge a deposit, which I wasn't doing previously because so many people were having these emotional outbursts or nightmares or psychedelic episodes before they even came to sat in ceremony with me, and they would get scared off.
Oh, really? What does this session cost approximately?
For a one-on-one session, it's $850.
Okay, but it's all day. And so what do people do? Are people usually local to you, or do they fly in and like you meet with them in the morning and you tell them, all right, we're going to go the whole day and you'll be done at night and stuff like that? Or like, what's the plan for the day?
So actually, most people come from out of state. I get people from all over the country. They stay nearby at a hotel. We spend the entire day together. Sometimes they stay in the area to do hiking or exploration or whatnot. But, we do meet usually by Zoom a couple weeks before we sit in ceremony together. And so they're already prepped for it.
This past year, do you have people that, COVID has set them off emotionally and they're a mess and you do the session and then they feel better about that? Has that come up?
Literally everybody I've worked with this year. Like either they're stuck at home and now they have to face themselves or their spouse or their lifestyle or something. This whole year has actually been amazing for making people look in the mirror.
Oh, so there is some good stuff that's come of it, you think?
Oh my God. Yeah, absolutely.
Is there anything that I haven't, asked you about that's important to talk about?
I think I just want to touch on just a little bit. Right now, we're seeing a decriminalization effort across the country with entheogens, right? And some cities are different than others. But we're really starting to understand that putting all of these plant medicines on Schedule 1 may not have been the right approach. And Johns Hopkins is really leading that research and providing us with a lot of insight in how psilocybin can be helpful. But I think it's also really important not to discount the spiritual part of it.
In order to get this at least somewhat into the mainstream, Johns Hopkins has to do it clinically. They have to kind of do it, that follows all the scientific trappings and everything. I understand at least. Mm-hmm. I think that's why they do it. But yeah, the other side of the spiritual side, people like you, hopefully this will at least, do you feel like the work they're doing is just going to help the whole, I don't want to call it an industry, but I don't know what you call it, but.
Unfortunately, it is an industry, right? As soon as we synthesize psilocybin, it's no longer a plant medicine. It's a prescription. And the indigenous people all over the world have been working with mushrooms for tens of thousands of years. And so I think that's also important, is that we don't forget that these little dudes grow outside.
Yeah.
And, they're best in their natural form, I gotta say.
What do you hear about mushrooms from like these, these indigenous peoples? Like, how do they talk about them? I'm sure it's completely different from how Johns Hopkins researchers talk about them. But do they talk about them in still yet a different way than you've ever seen? Like, when the people you run into that, again, do shamanism like you and, give mushrooms to people, I don't know, is there anyone that has described them in a way that really stuck with you where you're like, whoa, I didn't think about that?
Yeah, most indigenous approaches are very similar to mine. We treat the plant as a teacher because it is. And when we honor it and respect it for being that teacher, we're able to work with it in ways that we would have thought impossible. It becomes unlimited in its potential. And that honoring of the plant is really important to my practice, but also a lot of the indigenous practices.
Okay, gotcha. What's the best way for people to get in touch with you if they want help for themselves or, someone else?
The best way to get in touch would be the website, sacredheartmedicine.us, and just kind of check it out, poke around, see if it feels good, and reach out from there.
Oh, and last thing, unfortunately, it's just like everything else. I'm sure some shamans are like fugazis or fakers or not really in the best interest of everyone. Any tips on when someone's considering working with a shaman on things to watch out, like red flags?
Yeah, so a couple things. One, you should always follow your gut, your intuition. If something doesn't feel good, don't go with the person. And I don't care if that's me or somebody else, just in general. It's all about how it feels. But also, their life is a reflection of their own personal work. If they're constantly complaining about how they don't have enough money or their house is really dirty, that sort of thing, those are really big red flags. It means that they're not taking care of their own spiritual work.
Yeah, you don't want a shaman that's like, 3/4 crazy themselves, because it could alter what happens with you,
I mean, we're all crazy, to be real. I think that's most schizophrenics are shamans who haven't had training.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Well, very good. Well, Nadia, thanks for coming on the podcast. It's been a really cool call. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
You've been listening to the Finding Genius podcast with Richard Jacobs. If you like what you hear, be sure to review and subscribe to the Finding Genius podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And want to be smarter than everybody else? Become a premium member at findinggeniuspodcast.com. This podcast is for information only. No advice of any kind is being given. Any action you take or don't take as a result of listening is your sole responsibility. Consult professionals when advice is needed.